Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, K622. The Lost Score, The Forgotten Instrument, and the Story Behind a Masterpiece. Mozart's Clarinet Concerto in A major, K622 is music of extraordinary grace and serenity. Yet behind its beautiful melodies lies a remarkable story. An eccentric friendship, an unusual instrument, a vanished manuscript, and a masterpiece that generations later had to be reconstructed from clues. Mozart completed the concerto in October 1791 for the brilliant clarinetist Anton Stadler. It was his last great completed instrumental work. Less than 2 months later, Mozart was dead. Mozart and the man who could make a clarinet sing. Anton Stadler was more than a clarinetist for Mozart. He was his friend, fellow Freemason, and, judging from surviving accounts, a rather colorful character. Mozart gave him ridiculous nicknames, including Stadler, Miracle of Bohemia, and the wonderfully strange Nachabinachibi. Stadler was also frequently short of money. According to one later account, Mozart once gave Stadler 2 watches to pawn. Then Mozart lent him money to redeem the watches. Stadler allegedly spent that money as well, and Mozart never saw his watches again. Why would Mozart continue putting up with him? The answer may have been simple. Stadler could play. A contemporary description of his playing marveled at the beauty and softness of his tone, comparing the sound of his clarinet to the human voice. That image is especially appropriate, because Mozart would make the instrument sing in K622. But Stadler offered him something else as well, a new kind of clarinet. The strange clarinet that went lower. Stadler was experimenting with an extended clarinet, developed with the Viennese instrument maker Theodor Lotz. A surviving concert announcement from 1788 advertised Stadler performing on such a newly invented instrument. Today we call it a basset clarinet. Its crucial difference was its lower range. Stadler's instrument could descend below the lowest note of the ordinary clarinet, giving it a darker and richer voice. Mozart was fascinated by the possibilities. He made full use of them. Sometimes the solo line soars like a soprano. Moments later, it plunges into a warm, almost baritone register. The contrast makes it seem as though 2 singers inhabit a single instrument. Mozart had already explored Stadler's extraordinary sound in the Clarinet Quintet, K581, and in music associated with Stadler's extended instruments. By the time he wrote the concerto, he understood exactly what this particular player and instrument could do. K622, therefore, was not simply written for clarinet. It was written for Stadler and his clarinet. That fact would eventually create one of the greatest puzzles in classical music. Why was Mozart in such a hurry? Mozart entered the completed concerto in his catalogue on October 7, 1791. A performance by Stadler in Prague is traditionally associated with October 16. Although no surviving program proves beyond doubt that the concerto was performed on that particular day. Did Mozart really create the entire masterpiece in only a few days? Not quite. He had already begun another concerto, probably in 1789, for basset horn in G major. He abandoned it after 199 measures. That manuscript fragment, known as K621b, still survives. And much of its music eventually became the first movement of K622. So Mozart was not starting with an empty page in October 1791. He took the earlier material, moved it into A major, redesigned it for Stadler's extended clarinet, and completed the concerto. Even so, he was working during an astonishingly busy period. The Magic Flute premiered in Vienna on September 30th. La Clemenza di Tito had recently occupied him in Prague. The unfinished Requiem was also demanding his attention, and Stadler was preparing for performances away from Vienna. In a letter to Constanza, Mozart referred to completing Stadler's Rondo, the concerto's final movement. There was clearly some practical urgency in getting the work into Stadler's hands. A colorful story claims that Mozart was racing another composer to produce a concerto for Stadler. But reliable scholarly evidence for such a competition is lacking. The more likely story is less sensational but more believable. Mozart had an approaching musical deadline, an extraordinary performer waiting for the piece, and an earlier composition ready to be transformed. Under that pressure, he completed one of his greatest works. The first movement, Allegro, begins with the orchestra alone. Everything sounds bright and gracious. Then the clarinet enters, not as a conquering hero, but as a conversational partner. It climbs, descends, curls around the orchestral lines, and moves effortlessly between its contrasting registers. Mozart uses virtuosity, but rarely for empty display. The clarinet seems to be speaking. Then comes the adagio. Here almost everything unnecessary falls away. The clarinet begins with a long, simple melody above a quiet orchestra. There are no fireworks and no dramatic thunder. Only a single musical voice and the spaces between its breaths. The uploaded notes describe the movement beautifully. Clear and transparent, yet carrying loneliness and consolation underneath. The adagio later reached millions of listeners through the film Out of Africa. Parts of the concerto have also appeared in The King's Speech. Perhaps filmmakers are drawn to this music because it does not tell us exactly what to feel. Memory, love, sadness, and peace somehow coexist within it. Then Mozart changes the atmosphere. The final rondo, Allegro, dances. Its main theme is cheerful and mischievous, but darker passages occasionally cross the sunlight. The clarinet leaps between registers, wanders into minor keys, and repeatedly finds its way home. Mozart's final great instrumental work does not end in tragedy. It ends with life. Then the masterpiece disappeared. After Mozart's death on December 5, 1791, the story took a strange turn. His handwritten score of the concerto vanished. Mozart had apparently given the autograph to Stadler. Later, when Constanze tried to collect her husband's manuscripts, K622 was missing. What happened? No one knows. Constanze later reported several possibilities. Stadler had lost the manuscript, it had been stolen, or he had pawned it because he needed money. Given Stadler's financial troubles, the pawnshop story is irresistible. But it remains a story, not a proven fact. Somewhere along the road, Mozart's handwritten masterpiece disappeared. It has never been found. The publishers had a problem. The disappearance of the manuscript created one problem. Stadler's unusual instrument created another. Mozart had written notes an ordinary clarinet simply could not play. When publishers prepared the concerto after his death, Stadler's extended clarinet was extremely rare. Printing Mozart's solo line exactly as intended would have left most clarinetists unable to perform it. So the music was adapted. 3 publishers issued editions in 1801, altering low passages so they could be played on an ordinary clarinet. The concerto survived, but parts of Mozart's original solo line did not. Remarkably, musicians noticed the problem almost immediately. An 1802 reviewer praised the concerto but objected to the changes, arguing that Mozart's original passages should have been preserved, with playable alternatives offered for ordinary clarinets. The mystery was already visible, but solving it would take generations.
Reconstructing a lost Mozart. No one eventually discovered Mozart's original concerto in an attic. Instead, scholars had to reconstruct it from clues. The most valuable clue was Mozart's surviving 199-measure G major draft for basset horn. Because much of it corresponds to the first movement of K622, scholars could compare Mozart's handwriting with the later editions for ordinary clarinet. Some alterations almost revealed themselves. Imagine a melody descending naturally. Down, down, down. Then, precisely where the ordinary clarinet runs out of notes, the printed melody suddenly leaps upward. That awkward leap is a clue. Mozart's earlier manuscript sometimes shows what the melody was originally designed to do. simply continue downward. Researchers then compared the earliest printed editions and evidence preserved in the 1802 review. They examined repeated passages within the concerto and compared Mozart's writing for other extended clarinets and basset horns. In effect, they began thinking like Mozart. If a phrase appeared twice, could one version reveal the missing register of another? If an arpeggio had been awkwardly broken, would extending it downward restore its natural shape? Did the harmony point toward a missing low note? It was musical detective work. Clarinetist George Daisley proposed important corrections in the 1940s. And in 1951 Joseph Janus performed a reconstructed version in Prague, using an A clarinet fitted with an extended lower joint. Further research and reconstructions followed, including work by Yuri Kratikval, Ernst Hess, Hans Deinzer, and Alan Hacker. But reconstructing the notes solved only half the problem. Musicians also needed the lost instrument. No original Stadler basset clarinet survives. Instrument makers therefore studied historical descriptions, 18th-century clarinets, and a valuable 1794 illustration showing Stadler's unusual instrument. They then built modern basset clarinets, capable of playing the restored low passages. What we hear today should therefore be called a reconstruction, not a recovered original. Without Mozart's autograph, every detail cannot be known with certainty. Still, modern performances can bring us much closer to the sound Mozart imagined. A concerto that keeps getting lost and found. Yet the concerto's afterlife would prove nearly as remarkable as its creation. Even after musicians began recovering Mozart's original conception, K622 continued to gather strange stories of its own. There is an almost comic pattern to its history. First, Mozart's manuscript disappeared. Then the instrument for which he wrote it disappeared. Then, remarkably, even the concerto's first recording almost disappeared. The earliest known recording was made in 1929 by clarinetist Haydn Draper. For years it was believed that no copy had survived, until copies were discovered in Australian pressings. K622 seems to have spent 2 centuries playing hide and seek with history. And its later life produced another delightful connection. In 1957, the concerto was recorded, with Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony Orchestra, by one of the 20th century's most famous clarinetists, Benny Goodman. Yes, the king of swing. The American musician famous for jazz, big bands, and the swing era, was also a serious classical clarinetist. The distance between Stadler's Vienna and Goodman's America seems enormous. Yet both musicians understood the same secret about the instrument Mozart loved. A clarinet can laugh, it can dance, it can whisper, and it can sing. The music that survived everything. Through all its strange history, one thing never disappeared: the music itself. Today Mozart's concerto stands at the center of the clarinet repertoire. Widely regarded as the greatest clarinet concerto ever written, it remains the benchmark against which others are measured. Perhaps Mozart heard something in Stadler's instrument that others had not yet fully understood. He heard not merely a clarinet, but a human voice. And perhaps that is why, more than 2 centuries later, the adagio still feels so personal. When the clarinet begins its quiet melody, the mysteries surrounding K622, the lost manuscript, the vanished instrument, the reconstructed notes, seem to fall away. What remains is Mozart's music, intimate, timeless, and deeply human. And it still sings.
It's time to study new words in context. 1. Eccentric. Definition: unusual or different from what most people consider normal, especially in behavior or habits. Example: Mozart was known for his eccentric sense of humor and playful behavior. 2. Colorful. Definition: interesting, unusual, and full of character. Example: Stadler was a colorful character, with an interesting life and unusual stories surrounding him. 3. Pawn. Definition: To leave something valuable at a shop in exchange for money, you can get the item back later if you repay the money. Example, he had to pawn his watch because he needed money. 4. Putting up with. Definition, accepting an annoying or difficult person or situation without leaving or stopping it. Example, Mozart kept putting up with Stadler, even though Stadler often had money problems. 5. Arpeggio. Definition, a group of notes from a chord played one after another, instead of at the same time. Example, the clarinet plays a smooth arpeggio that moves from low notes to high notes.
Comprehension questions. 1. When did Mozart complete his clarinet concerto, K622? Answer. Mozart completed the concerto in October 1791, less than 2 months before his death. 2. For whom did Mozart write the clarinet concerto? Answer. He wrote it for Anton Stadler, a brilliant clarinetist and friend of Mozart. 3. What kind of relationship did Mozart and Stadler have? Answer. They were friends and fellow Freemasons. Mozart also joked with Stadler and gave him playful nicknames. 4. What was unusual about Stadler's clarinet? Answer. Stadler played an extended instrument, now called a basset clarinet, which could play lower notes than an ordinary clarinet. 5. Why was the basset clarinet important to Mozart's concerto? Answer. Its extra low notes gave Mozart a wider range of sounds. He could make the clarinet sound bright and high at one moment and deep and warm at another. 6. Did Mozart compose the entire concerto in only a few days? Explain. Answer. No. Mozart had already written 199 measures of an earlier concerto for basset horn. He later used much of this music in the first movement of K622. 7. Why was Mozart probably in a hurry to finish the concerto? Answer. Stadler was preparing for performances away from Vienna, so Mozart probably needed to finish the concerto in time for him to take and perform it. 8. What is special about the second movement, the Adagio? Answer. The Adagio has a simple, peaceful clarinet melody that can express sadness, comfort, and beauty at the same time. 9. What happened to Mozart's original handwritten score after his death? Answer. The score disappeared and has never been found. 10. What are some possible explanations for the disappearance of the manuscript? Answer. Stadler may have lost it, had it stolen, or pawned it because he needed money. No one knows exactly what happened. 11. Why did early publishers change some of Mozart's clarinet notes? Answer. Some of Mozart's original notes were too low for an ordinary clarinet. Publishers changed them so more clarinetists could play the concerto. 12. How did scholars begin reconstructing Mozart's original version? Answer. They studied Mozart's surviving 199 measure draft, early printed editions, the 1802 review, repeated musical patterns, and Mozart's other music for extended clarinets and basset horns. 13. Why did instrument makers also have to reconstruct the basset clarinet? Answer. Stadler's original instrument did not survive. Makers studied old instruments, historical descriptions, and an illustration from 1794 to build modern basset clarinets that could play Mozart's low notes. 14. What unusual thing happened to the concerto's first known recording? Answer. The 1929 recording by Haydn Draper was thought to be lost for many years. Later, copies were discovered in Australian pressings. 15. Why does the article compare the clarinet to a human voice? Mozart used the clarinet to express many different feelings and colors. It can laugh, dance, whisper, and sing, making it seem almost like a human voice.